The protests in Hong Kong begin to look a lot like a civil war. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Hong Kong and China are just in the thick of it right now. Headlines are flooding in and out about the latest occurrences in Hong Kong, and none of them look too good. It's painfully clear that these are no longer simple protests. We are witnessing the brink of a civil war, if it has not already begun. The first thing I want to talk about today on our long list of issues is the university standoff occurring. Anti-Chinese government protesters have barricaded themselves into Polytechnic University for days at this point. This appears to be some sort of stronghold for the protesters. I've heard speculation that they locked themselves into the university because they are trying to defend critical internet servers from being taken over by the Chinese government. They fear that once the government holds that, they'll control their means of communication, and the protests will go dark. There are a couple of other reasons why they may have decided to lock themselves in, but the bottom line is they're there, and the police want them out. The police force has tried to break through, but the protesters have fought back with petrol bombs, which are essentially Molotov cocktails, and arrows. It's getting pretty medieval with the arrow touch. Now, parents of some of these students who are trapped inside the university have shown up with signs asking to save their children, because obviously, they fear for their well-being. Things are escalating at a very fast rate right now. The protesters are throwing bombs at the police, and the police are threatening to use live ammunition, aka bullets. I must admit too that the police are playing a very odd game here. Some of the protesters are actually trying to flee the university and go back home, but when they try to escape, the cops fire tear gas and rubber bullets at the exits, trying to keep them locked in, preventing them from leaving, which is supposedly what the police want. This happened a couple times already with the same result. Someone tries to leave, the police stop it from happening. I have to ask myself, why is that? The police have issued statements asking these students to leave, to evacuate the premises, but when they try to, they are stopped dead in their tracks. It seems to me like the police have an angle at this. I think it's likely that China wants the protesters to continue to get frustrated until they snap. Imagine that a protester does end up killing a couple of police officers with this Molotov cocktail. That gives the officers all of the excuses to walk in there and kill everybody. Because let's be real here. Those protesters who are trapped in the university, their only saving grace right now is the fact that the police would be condemned internationally if they walked in and stormed the place. But once you give them an excuse to do that, it's over. The protesters have no defense against a well-trained army, a police force, or anyone who China sends to knock down that door. If the police truly wanted to end this occupation of the university, they would simply let the students leave, but it's clear they have other aims here. Estimates are that 300 to 400 protesters remain trapped inside, and a lot of these people are really just students. They have no idea how to make the next move, they're not prepared for this, and they're getting scared now. When people get scared, they tend to make rash decisions. Some try to flee, they are attacked. Police try to enter, and they feel like they have to defend themselves. They shoot arrows and throw cocktails. Then, you have a conflicting message of the police officers themselves, asking protesters to leave, but they make it impossible to do so. Also, another thing to add, is a new development occurred last night. At 5:30 a.m., the police staged a surprise advance. They tried to enter supposedly while the protesters were sleeping, when they were vulnerable, and video shows police officers kicking people to the ground and arresting them. In response to that, the protesters continued to fling their petrol bombs at the officers, and these bombs left some damage. Things caught fire as a natural consequences of throwing gasoline bombs around. So the firefighters had to show up, they put out the fire, but the police had to flee at that point because things were getting too chaotic. Right now it's unclear how many protesters remain, but the police allegedly retreated after arresting a couple of them. This is not normal protesting if you have not realized by now. That sounds a lot like a civil war. There is extreme violence between citizens and police officers who are really actors on behalf of China. I've also seen on social media that allegedly a Canadian exchange student may be trapped in the university. I say allegedly because the only evidence is that someone posted on a university confessions page saying that's what's happening to them. So it hasn't been verified. But the writer of that post states that they are trapped, they're from UFT, and the protesters have accepted their fate. They know they're in a bad position, but they're fighting for Hong Kong, and they're willing to do what they have to make sure their message is heard. The exchange student does not feel the same way though. They don't want to get caught up in this and become a casualty of this brewing civil war. They say that they look Chinese, so it's not as easy as walking out the door because they'll be identified as a protester most likely and then get shot at with rubber bullets or tear gas. So there really is no option right now aside from staying with the protesters, and you risk being labeled a protester because of that, or you can try and flee, but because of your looks you also might get labeled a protester. There's no winning situation for that, and that's contingent on if it's true or not. If it's true, it's probably very scary to be a foreigner in the midst of a national crisis right now. At the same time, if any more students are contemplating going to Hong Kong for exchange, I strongly suggest not doing so, because as we've seen, it's been an exponential trajectory so far. Things started off relatively mild, they got more intense, more intense, more intense, and right now it seems like there's no end to that. Things keep reaching new boiling points, and at some time, someone's going to crack. You don't want to be caught up in that, especially if you are just an exchange student. I would stay clear of China, Hong Kong, and all of the areas within that immediate vicinity. Now, to add further complexity to the issue, China is also beginning to mobilize their army. 50 members of the PLA, that's their national army, have shown up in the streets to help clean debris. What a lovely excuse. Let's not be fooled by any facades here. It's clearly a show of strength. China is not sending in their army, their top military force, to simply clean up debris. What they're doing is scaring protesters. They're showing them the might that can fall on top of them if they continue their path. These army troops, they say that we've come of our own free will to lend a helping hand. That's the biggest lie ever imaginable. China's army is not autonomous. They only move when they are ordered to. It is completely strategic, and if you buy that excuse from the army and the Chinese representatives, I don't know what to tell you. It's a fact that they're here trying to intimidate people, and I also find it so funny. Their name, the PLA, it stands for the People's Liberation Army. Who are they liberating? They're liberating the protesters from their rights and freedoms. That's what they're here to do. If you want to be realistic, this operation is more akin to a peace mission internationally. When nations send their soldiers abroad to maintain the peace, yeah, they're doing it for some humanitarian reasons, but those are secondary to the first point, intimidating people from threatening the status quo and this peace. In China, peace means one thing very differently from what we mean in the Western world. Over there, it means total subjugation to the authoritarian government. The Hong Kong protesters not complying, so we have to up the ante a little bit. It's clear the protesters are not afraid of the police officers, but for them to shoot a bow and arrow at a member of the PLA, a soldier, it's a very different game, and that will escalate the heights tremendously. So doing it at the police officers is one thing, but at China's national army, trying to start a battle with them, that's suicide. Now, in terms of the international community, America has come forward and condemned the violence. Europe has said the same thing. Escalating violence is unacceptable, but truly, words mean nothing. China does not care. You can condemn them all you want, tell them how bad they are, make them write an apology, but what really counts here is the actions, and that's not going to change based on condemnation, even from the strongest nation in the world, America. It simply is not effective. One of the more realistic approaches here is to apply sanctions, harsh ones, from everyone. Europe, Canada, America, any country who has a trade deal with China, which is a lot of them, they have to take a stand right now and stop buying. China really is a massive exporter. Their economy is booming because they're able to sell a lot of their cheap products to everyone. They make a lot of money from that. If we start saying, no, China, we're not going to deal with you anymore because your humanitarian actions are simply not acceptable from today's standards. They're terrible, we don't condone it, and we're going to find a different supplier for our goods. Maybe we spend a little bit more money, but it sends the message. Money is very powerful. China is as big as it is due to its economic development. Putting that in danger is not something that they will stand for. They might start to toe the line, but only if that really comes under threat. A single nation is not enough. We already see it happening with America and their trade war. China's been hit with billions of dollars of tariffs, which makes their products less desirable when entering the American market because they cost more money. China's responded with currency inflation. They are willingly suppressing the value of their own dollar to combat the tariff. So the tariff, what it does, is it makes the product more expensive. China says, forget that, we're just going to make our currency lower so it's cheaper to import our goods. That's how they're playing it. You hit them in the weak spot and they have an answer to it, and they're also threatening tariffs back on America. If the global community joined that effort though, doesn't have to be the trade war, but sanctions, any type of economic hardships that we can impose upon China will be effective when it's compounded. China really is a seller's economy. Who are they going to sell to if the world's biggest trading partners are actively banded together in an opposition force against them? The answer is nobody. That's one way to go about it, and there's some other ways too, but a full-scale war is not happening. That could quite possibly lead to an apocalypse. Nuclear weapons from America and China, two of the strongest countries in all of human existence, is not something we want to see, and that's where China really has the edge here. Times have changed. Violence doesn't really work on big players anymore because there is the risk of everyone's mutually assured destruction. If we're going to do something, it really has to be economically. The fact is that China has to be reined in. This Hong Kong protest situation really only is the tip of the iceberg. Don't forget about the religious minority concentration camps that they've established. They are harvesting organs. They're indoctrinating people who think differently. They're doing all of these crazy actions that would be considered by anybody to be heinous acts. They're not acceptable, but China is that big dog right now, so there is a certain level of fear that comes in with trying to rein them in. My answer to that is if we do it together, well, that's our best shot at it. Maybe China will still be able to resist, but not for long. Who can they really deal with if nobody's on their side anymore? And that's not blind hope either. All of these countries, all of Europe, the United States, Canada, everyone is saying they condemn China, but they're not doing anything about it. We know people feel the same way. It's not even debatable. Everyone is in the same bucket here. They realize what's happening is truly terrible, but no actions have been done yet. I'm saying, let's go right to taking action right now. This is extremely important as well, because it's not just the fate of Hong Kong right now, it's much of the world. China currently is under a dark regime that will spread if permitted. It's not just saving Hong Kongers or the people who are in the concentration camps as one goal, but the second is stopping China's expansion right now. You think that faltering on their agreement with Hong Kong is the beginning? These camps to cleanse the different ways of thinking, these are only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we know and where things can still go. If America were to ever lose power and not be the dominant force in the world, which some fools are actively trying to bring about, China would quickly ascend. They would be the number one force. This is not a game. The possibility of conflict isn't so out of the picture, and the real cause of it is the authoritarian regime in China. It's a massive country with a massive economy, with a strong military, all being controlled by an authoritarian government who is not held accountable by their people. That's a recipe for disaster. The fact that democracy is trying to surface in Hong Kong is not something to be cast away. That could be the very last glimmer of it we see for a very long time. Lots of mainland Chinese people do not have the same perspective of the issue as the Hong Kongers. That can be due to the culture, because Hong Kong once was not even part of China. It was a British-controlled territory, and they've had a different perspective for some time now. They have a different belief structure, and it's very different for a Hong Konger to tell mainland Chinese people about the wonders of a free society versus someone from the West showing up. At least this way there is some type of relationship that is had there. They're still Chinese, and they're bringing up an idea that they can trust. From someone else, there comes to question the alternative motives and whatnot. I really do think the issues all boil down to that regime. Authoritarian, dictator-like systems do not work in today's day and age because of the risk for chaos, how quickly they can descend into madness as we've seen here. When the government is held accountable to the citizens, you benefit from a sort of collective conscience. Only if most people are okay with something, then it's likely to happen. But when you divide it up among the billions of people in China, it's unlikely that something like killing off a vast majority of your population is going to be widely accepted. And if you try to propose that, you're going to get voted out of office. Democracy, freedom of speech, intellectualism, these are all tools that we use to control our government and not have them control us. These are the tools that are missing from China, and I want to see it be brought in. I think Hong Kong is the vehicle to do that, and letting them be squashed is terrible not only for them, but for the entire community when we consider the future possibilities of where China can still head. As always, I'll keep you up to date on the latest developments, but for now, that's the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.